Hey everyone, welcome to the Random Redshirt podcast. I am one of the hosts, Zach, and the other host is Chris. What's up, my brother from another mother?
Hello, everyone, my dear friend Zach, bro. It's great to be here. Great to see you. Hello, everyone around the world in the interweb and Antarctica. And I was just able to get my computer. It's not even my computer. I was able to get a computer to work after like some technical difficulties. And it's fitting since our last episode we were talking about AI and Skynet. And so I'm having all kinds of technical problems today. Thank you.
If the Random Redshirt stops making episodes for the next few months, you might want to check in on us. Like, message us on Facebook or Instagram, be like, "Hey, are you guys still alive over there?" And then you'll know whether or not Skynet got to us. But yeah,
Exactly.
we might have gone down the rabbit trail with that, Chris, and now we're gonna pay for it.
Oh, you're totally gonna pay
But
for
we
it.
got to
Yeah.
get the message to the masses, though, right? So
That's right.
yeah.
That's right.
Not that you guys
Nice.
all don't know that there's AI out there, but I mean, come on. We've all seen the movies. We know AI can be
Hmm.
bad most of
Hmm.
the time. Yeah. So if this is your first time watching or listening to us, welcome to the Random Redshirt podcast. We're a couple of nerdy and geeky guys who like to talk about all things Star Trek and Star Wars and everything in between. And today we are jumping back to our Spotlight series, but we're doing a kind of a one-off here. When I was on a work trip, I'd mentioned to you, Chris, that I had watched this episode of the original series of Star Trek that I hadn't seen in a long, 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 long time. And it's not one of the more popular episodes as far as I'm aware.
Hmm.
Uh, but it certainly has a very important and profound and deep message embedded in the episode itself.
Yeah, I think so. And it was so much fun to watch, right?
Yeah.
Gamesters of Triskelion. If I got that
Yeah.
title correct, I
I
believe I
can't
got
ever
it.
say it correctly. So I'm like, oh, Triskelion, Truckasalian, Truck Lion. You just say the name of the episode because I'm not going to get it right. But yes, we are going to be doing that spotlight episode here today. So we appreciate it. Be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. If you're listening to the audio version, you can find all the video versions of our episodes. Well, all the video versions of episodes we did video in on our YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform if you want access to all of the episodes we've made over the last, by the way, Chris, almost 3 years.
This has been a blast to do. It's so much fun for us. It helps like free our mind, and it's just a great time for us to be together, for us to share what we love, and for us to just take our minds into different places to that we enjoy. It's
Yeah,
wonderful.
unwinding a bit, shall we? Yeah, from
Yeah.
the busyness that is life and everything else. So I went to a local convention, Comic Con, and I want to show this really quickly, and then we're going to
Yeah,
jump in.
please, please.
I met an artist there, and she was doing like not remarks because remarks are what they do on the cover of comic books, but she was doing uh like markups of artwork on the side of Funko Pops. And if you collect Funko Pops or if you don't, there are artists who will do images on the side of the window pane of the Funko Pops. And I'd seen her there, and I was like, you know what? So I had gone home for a little while. I came back and decided to bring. If you're listening to this, you won't be able to see it, but my James Bond Spectre edition, Daniel Craig James Bond Spectre edition Funko Pop, which is a specialty series. I don't know how limited it is or whatever, but I didn't pay a lot for it several years ago. Apparently, it's gone up, which is cool. But I had her do a custom image on the side of it, and she did a Daniel Craig as
Man.
James Bond, which is really cool. It's a cartoon,
Yeah.
it's animated version, right? Cartoon animated version. That's kind of one of her styles she does, and I really like it. It's just great of him in his white tuxedo holding his Walter PPK, and she signed it, which is pretty cool. So I want to give a shout out to Tina Michelle, who was the artist. You can find her on Instagram. We follow her on there. So if you go to the accounts that we follow, you can find her on there for all of her artwork and everything. So really appreciate that. Awesome, awesome art. And it was a lot of fun meeting her.
That looks awesome, by the way. It's incredible. I didn't even know that was a thing like to do on the on those Funko Pops. So I that's awesome. That's incredible knowing that that's there and to be able to
Yeah,
do it.
and she
Yeah.
she told me we can always, if we ever wanted to do anything in the future, because I think she's based out of Florida, we can always send stuff off to her and she can do the artwork and then send it back. So if you have any a Funko, Chris, you wanted something done on like
Yeah.
Captain America or something like that, she could totally do it. So
You
be
read
pretty
my
cool.
mind. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I know you, Chris. I know your love for the Cap.
That's right. The captain.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's right. So all right. So let's jump into this. The Gamesters of
Triskelion.
Triskelion. There you go. I would want to call it
Yeah.
Triskelion. Anyways, this is an interesting episode. This is not one of the most popular episodes. Again, like I said before, that I'm aware of the original series. But this is from season 2, episode 17. First aired in 1968, beginning of January 1968, so just after the holidays. Was written by Margaret Arman and is a very interesting episode because it deals with some things that were probably pretty prevalent back in the 1960s.
Yeah, it sure does in a different way, right?
Right.
And it frames it in this way where it's you could also think of it in gladiatorial days. So it kind of frames it's in the future, but it's taking from the concept of gladiators, like essentially, and the gladiators being slaves, essentially. So it's nice that they're able to relate it to that topic in our past, right? So at the present, it was in the past, and then we're able to do that in Star Trek in the future and the television show's future. So it is very interesting that they chose to do that and just Star Trek's always allegory, so it was really cool that they did this, I think. Um what also came to me, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the name Triskelion, and I had been thinking about that, and as we talk through this, the nature of three. So
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah,
Try. Yeah.
try.
Yeah.
So
Didn't even connect that.
yeah. So this is cool. The nature of three is all throughout this episode, and we're gonna kind of touch on that like as we go through. So
That reminded me really quickly. So
yeah.
when I was on my work trip, I
Hmm.
this is something I like to do when I go on work trips. I like to scour the area that I'm in for like local comic book stores or trading card stores, things like that. And there was one there that I've been to before. And I went in and I they had some loose packs of one of the old Rittenhouse Star Trek original series trading card set. You could pull autograph cards and stuff like that ever. And no joke, Chris, I had watched this episode and I opened up some loose packs. And what do I find? A dual autograph of two characters from that exact episode we're going to talk
Oh,
about.
wow.
So this is autographed by Joseph Ruskin as Galt and Steve Sandor as Lars. Unfortunately, both these gentlemen have passed away. They are
Mhm.
no longer with us, but ironic, right? That I would pull that having decided to randomly watch this particular episode of Toss. I guess it was meant to be.
It was meant to be, man. Everything is connected. So
Yeah.
now here we are talking about it.
And now
So
here we
cool.
are. So it's pretty neat. We just after having had the discussions about watching this episode when I was on my work trip and some cool interactions with the episode, we're like, yeah, we should just why not? Let's just talk about it, right? So
Yeah.
we'll go back to the mirror universe in the future and near future. But for now, we're going to talk about this. So a very interesting start to this, Chris, as the Enterprise enters orbit around Gamma 2, which is supposed to be an uninhabited world. And I think they're there doing some type of scientific survey mission or something like that. Pretty common for a ship like the Enterprise.
Yeah, there's like a communication post that's supposed to be on Gamma 2, I believe, and they're doing a check on the communication post, I believe. I believe it's like a
Yeah,
Federation communication
automatic
post. Yeah.
communications and
Mhm.
astrogation. Yep.
Yeah, so that's pretty neat that they're doing that. And I thought it so they're gonna go do a checkout of it, right? And so it's kind of interesting because for some reason the Captain Kirk feels like he has to do this, he has to do the checkout and be part of the checkout of this, communication post. And he invites Chekhov and Uhura to go with him to beam down.
Yeah, and honestly, like maybe because they don't really tell us, right? Because it's just a TV show. But
Yeah.
maybe in this case, this particular communication astrogation station is a critical station or
Hmm.
has some significance for the Federation. They want, he wants to go down to make sure that he gets eyes on it as a captain. Or maybe he just needs to get off the ship because he's got some cabin fever. I don't know. Who knows? But we don't know that for sure. But we do know that they're going to beam down, and right in the middle of the beam down, they're transported somewhere else, and they just appear on this like it's not a platform, but like this area outside this big gate.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're disoriented. They're like, where are they? They're thinking, is this Gamma 2s or was a different planet? And Kirk's like, no, look at the sky. This does not look like Gamma 2 at all. And Uhura's like, hey, well, this is like the craziest like landing platform I've ever been on. It's got this intricate kind of three-part design on the landing platform. So that was pretty neat to see. A lot of creativity and originality there. And I think shortly after that, um, we get these what we know as thralls, but we get those creatures that come uh, and face off against the three, Captain Kirk, Chekhov, and Uhura.
Yeah, and both sides of this know right away there's something wrong, right? The first
Yeah,
side is Scotty reporting to Spock saying, "Hey, when they beamed down, when the landing party left, there was no light, there was no sparkle or shimmer. They were just gone." So right away he knows, yeah, something's not right here, right? I mean, he's done probably thousands of beam outs and beam ups, and that's not how it goes. We know that's not how it goes. This is the audience, right?
that's right.
And and then the landing party of Uhura, Chekhov, and Kirk also know something's wrong because they try to communicate with the Enterprise and there's no contact. So
Yep,
clearly something is awry here.
yep, definitely, clearly something awry. You like how Spock, like when Scotty calls Spock and to say, "Hey, they disappeared," and Spock's like, "Well, Mr. Scott, I presume you mean like it was a different kind of disappearance other than the normal like beam down that you would do in the transporter." He's always got to be Spock, and like
Yeah, I mean, he may
his
be
Vulcan
Vulcan,
part.
but is he not sarcastic though too? I mean, without
Yeah.
emotion, he is sarcastic, right? It's very interesting.
Yeah, so I like that.
Yeah.
So yeah. So they
So
face off on the planet, right? Kirk and
yeah.
Uhura and Chekhov. And you know what I thought was funny when they do the face off, that initial fight? Uhura is facing off against the two ladies. Uh Chekhov gets the big guy.
Yeah. He
Yeah,
does.
like Chekhov gets the huge guy, and I'm like, oh well, Captain Kirk gets like the normal sized guy, and like Chekhov's like battling the huge, really, really tall guy.
Well, according to Chekhov, everything came from Russia. So that wouldn't that mean martial arts originated from Russia too? I mean, come on. If that's the case, shouldn't he know how to defeat the big guy? Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So
that is true. There's some irony there, right? Of Chekhov having to fight the big guy.
yeah.
But yeah, they start this fight, right? And but then they get, excuse me, someone who appears, a mysterious figure,
Hmm.
and it's Galt. And he is the master thrall of the planet Triskelion.
Triskelion.
Did I say it right?
Think so, yes.
Triskelion or Triskelion? Triskelion?
Triskelion, yeah.
Yeah. So the whole fight thing doesn't go well. And they're taken to the dungeon. They're put in cuffs. And uh, Galt reveals that his masters, which are what they call the providers, were expecting them and that arranged their transport. So they're not there by accident. Kirk now learns, and the landing party learns, that this is not some accident that they were taken there.
Hmm. And it's kind of neat because they mention the providers, but you have this mystery throughout the entire episode of like them trying to figure out who the providers are, where did the providers come from, why did the providers bring them here. So I thought, that was pretty cool part of the episode,
Yeah.
you know. And back on the Enterprise, uh, you've got them scanning the planet trying to see if they can find anyone, and no one is on Gamma 2 because they're still back on Gamma 2 trying to find out where they are, but no leads yet.
Yeah. And as we know, Dr. McCoy tends to get a bit irritated by Spock's Vulcanness,
Mhm.
right? And he's getting very frustrated with Spock's, he can't find anything. Spock can't find anything. They can't find anything through their scans. And this is really, really frustrating McCoy. And it's very interesting that through all of this, Spock is saying something to the effect of like, I would welcome a suggestion, doctor, even an emotional one, as to where to look. And McCoy says, first time you've ever asked me for anything, and it has to be on an occasion like
Yeah.
this. Oh, that like the exchanges in this episode between Spock and McCoy and Spock and Scotty, but in particular Spock and McCoy are just absolutely hysterical and
Yeah.
classic Spock and McCoy.
Yeah, that was great banter that they had there. And it starts off that initial banter is kind of lighthearted,
Yeah.
for them.
Yep.
Um, so at the beginning, and then as progresses and gets a little bit much more serious throughout the episode.
Yes, it really, really does. And we go back to Triskelion. I think I said that right. I'm
Mhm.
trying. I'm trying here. I'm trying. So the landing party again, Spock or Spock, Kirk,
Kirk.
Uhura, and Chekhov are taken to these. They look like little prison cells, but I guess they're their room or their quarters, which have already been made up and everything. Because again, they were expected.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they have again like jail cell type doors with their names on them, and they attempt to attack the thralls that are guarding them and try to make a run for it. But unfortunately, we then get the 1960s sci-fi ness, which is Galt closing his eyes and it being lighting up and sparks and everything like that, and then instantly uh they regret it. They have
Yeah.
those little white triangles on the collars that are put on them, which lights up, and all of a sudden they stop. They grab like the collars and they're just and they go to the ground and in agony, and you're like, oh, okay, well I guess that's how this is gonna go.
Obedience colors, as they call them there.
Yeah,
That's
I
what
I kind of relate. I when I first watched this, I was like, oh, this is like they have like dog shock collars on, right? Like
yes.
that's kind of how I related it. I've never okay. Let's clear the air here for a second. All right. I know there's people out there who use a shock collars. I'm not gonna, judge anybody. I personally have never used a shock collar on any of my dogs that I've had, and I've had now four. Personally, I wouldn't. Just again personally because I know there can be damage to them if you're not doing it correctly and everything. So
Mhm.
I say that because yes, shock collars are a thing. I don't pass judgment on people who use them, but I don't. So, anyways, I don't know why the heck I talked about that, but that's what it reminded me of. It reminded me of like a shock collar.
Did you I wonder if they had I'm just curious, like if they had dog shock collars then the episode came out in 1968.
I
So
would think they did.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know when they were invented, but I would imagine though, maybe they didn't, but if they did, they would be pretty rudimentary, I would think,
Hmm.
compared to the ones today. The ones today are, I mean, they're, you know, no pun intended, light years. Okay, maybe there was a pun there. Light years ahead of where they would have been back then, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah, so this doesn't go well, right? They get shocked, they go to the ground, and they're like, "Oh crap, this isn't going well for us." Uh Galt opens his eyes again, the collar's shut off, and they get back up. And he tells them, "Hey, look, escape for you guys is impossible."
Yeah.
And I think you said it right, the collars of obedience.
Yeah.
And so I guess they're like, "Well, that didn't work out too well. I guess back to our cells."
That's right. They get to their cells. Shortly after they get their trainers, right? They get the um Uhura gets a trainer that she uh vehemently dislikes, and so she's battling that trainer. And Chekhov gets a trainer, a yellow lady. I think, well, she's yellow when at least in the color that was on my television, she looked kind of yellowish. And then Kirk gets the lady Shauna with her green hair. And
Surprise, he gets the best looking of the bunch, right? Because it's Kirk and he's got to get the good looking woman, right? I mean, that's just let's be honest with you. That's just we know how this goes. We've seen this rodeo before, right?
Yeah, that's right. Um, so that's cool. They had some cute moments with Chekhov and his trainer.
Yeah,
I think it's because his trainer liked him, and she says his name is Chekhov, something like that.
yeah.
So
Tries to get her to pronounce his name. Yeah.
yeah, so I like
Very
that.
interesting. I could see that there was a hard moment on in there where, like you said, Uhura doesn't like this trainer she gets, and he says to her, "There is little time. I have been selected for you." As he backs her into her cell, and then there's like a struggle that goes on. There's some screaming, some yelling. Uhura's crying out, and Kirk is just irate. He wants to go save her so badly, but he's trapped in his cell because his Thrall hasn't come in yet, and that would be really difficult. Like what's happening to Lieutenant Uhura? He's going nuts because he's thinking to himself, I can't do anything about it, and he's the captain, right? He's supposed to keep protect his crew.
That was the most for me, I felt that was the most uncomfortable part of the entire episode.
Yeah,
Right. So
yeah, because it kind of felt like Kirk is a bystander in the sense that he can't do anything about it, and it's kind of maybe. Did you feel like it was kind of hinting towards, even though it didn't? I don't think it happened, but like hinting towards almost kind of like a rape scene a little
yeah,
bit. Yeah,
yeah, that's why I thought, you know, yeah, that's for me. It was the most uncomfortable part for sure. So
yeah, but I
yeah,
don't think it actually was. It
right.
just, at least afterwards, you're like, okay, it doesn't look like that was the case, but when it started to happen, you're like, okay, wait a second, I don't remember this. I don't remember this episode very well, so is that actually going to happen? But I think it's more of he was, yeah, I don't even know, but it doesn't seem like that would actually happened in that period of time.
No, right. I agree. Nothing happened because the her trainer was like, "Well, we're not wait, it's something like we're not supposed to reject the one that selected you, or yeah, you're not supposed to do that." And I guess you just left. He's
Yeah,
like,
but on the Enterprise, Spock, we of course we know is trying to find the crew,
mhm.
and Dr. McCoy is continuing to get more and more frustrated. And this is one of those times where, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I don't remember too many times throughout TOS where you see Spock in a situation where he is kind of just dumbfounded. Like he can't he has no idea. He doesn't even know where to start on how to figure this problem out. Spock has been maybe taken aback at times, but I just feel like there hasn't been too many moments I can think of in TOS where Spock's just like, I got nothing.
Yeah, usually there's a little bit of something where he can just choose the logical path forward. But this one, there wasn't anything because he had scanned Gamma 2, he had scanned the solar system. If apparently from what he said, if they had been beamed out into outer space, they would have been able to see that on their scanners too, and there was nothing there. So there was no empirical data set or data source or empirical evidence that he could use uh to go forward with until and I think the helmsman on the Enterprise, she says something and calls Mr. Spock over and says, hey, I found something, something to do with ionized gas or something that she couldn't explain. And that's when he kind of latches onto that to investigate.
Yeah, I think he said something to the effect of like, well, I hope that my idea is correct or something like that. And then there's a quote where McCoy says, "Hope. I always thought that was a human failing, Mr. Spock." And he says, "True, Doctor. Constant exposure does result in a certain degree of contamination."
Yeah, I like that.
There's Spock being sarcastic again.
He's got a sense of humor. He just doesn't admit that he has a sense of humor.
Spock's always had a sense of humor. He just
Yeah.
doesn't acknowledge it
Yeah.
as humor, right? Because that would be a human emotion, even though
Yeah.
he's part human or half human, right? But yeah, very interesting. The continued frustration between McCoy and Spock, and Spock's dumbfounded. He has no clue really where to start until he, kind of sees this gas trail or whatever. And then of course Scotty's also getting frustrated, and it's a lot of frustration building up on the Enterprise trying to figure out what the heck, where do they go? You know?
Yeah, and I like how it's the focus of those three. So you've got three on the planet with Chekhov, Uhura, and Captain Kirk. You've got this conflict of the three of Spock and Scotty and McCoy on the ship, which is perfect.
Yeah, that's true. That's really a good point. I didn't really think about that, but Triskelion makes sense. Try. So that's good. I
Yeah,
I would never
no,
I
it's
would
all
never
good.
have thought of that.
It's all good. Oh, and the three sons. Triskelion has three sons. Kirk mentioned that when they're on the planet. It's like, yeah, we got three sons here.
No,
So
that's an episode of threes.
yeah, it's a
Yeah, that's
totally
pretty
episode of
cool.
threes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you watched this episode before and you had not had Chris helping you to dissect the episode, you never would have known that. You might not have put all of those things together. And actually, isn't that three observations that you just made there right in a row?
Oh, no.
It's a three of threes of three. I don't know. I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm going down a rabbit trail
It's
here.
all good.
But anyways, yeah. So we continue on, right?
Mhm.
And Spock's, like you said, following this ionized trail, and he says they're gonna go to this other solar system, and McCoy's adamant they got to keep searching around here because maybe their particles or atoms are scattered somewhere and they got to keep searching Gamma 2. And Spock's like, no, we're going to go chase this thing. McCoy goes, this is no time to be going on some wild goose chase or whatever. And then
Yeah.
Spock, I love this quote where Spock goes, Doctor, I am chasing Captain Kirk, Lieutenant Uhura, and Ensign Chekhov, not some wild aquatic fowl.
Yeah, I love that. That was
Oh,
outstanding.
yeah. It's just, I mean, there's so many quotes just from Spock alone in this episode that it's just hysterical.
Hmm.
But Uhura, I believe, as we continue on, does something right where Kirk then stands up and takes her place, and he's the one that gets whipped by Klug. I
Yeah.
think's the guy's name, that the big tall guy,
Yeah.
in order to get punishment. And I think he looks at this big guy with the whip and goes, "Yeah, nah, Uhura might not survive all of that, but I'll take the beating. And oh, by the way, I'm the captain, so I'm responsible for my crew, and therefore I will take that punishment." We've talked when we did our podcast collab with the Where's Bev podcast, and we had like the
Hmm.
Captain What If mashup, which was so much fun.
Hmm.
I know many of you had asked about that and asked for it, and we couldn't wait to do it, so we did it. And if you have not watched it or listened to it, please go down to our channel below or whatever podcast platform you're on. Be sure to go listen to that because that was so much fun. But I believe, Chris, you mentioned in that episode where you talked about Kirk's loyalty to his crew, and you talked about how much he cares about his crew members. And this is a prime example here where he's willing to step up and take responsibility for one of his crew members.
Yeah, that's a great example, Zach. Yeah, he will totally sacrifice himself for his crew and go to the ends of the earth, right, to save members of his crew. So and that's what he does here. He says, "Hey, I'm responsible," and he saves Uhura essentially in that.
I'll be honest with you. This is not to get off on a sidebar, but just really quickly. Of the five legacy captains we've talked about, personally, and I want to get your take on this, Chris, personally, because we're talking about sacrificing yourself for your crew. I kind of only feel like the ones who would do it is Kirk and Archer. Do you feel like Picard, Cisco, or Janeway would actually sacrifice their own lives for their crew? Maybe they would, but maybe it's just we didn't have a lot of situations that Picard, Cisco, and Janeway were in where they had to do something like that.
Yeah.
But I just kind of feel like, with Picard, I don't know. He's not necessarily, there hasn't necessarily been a situation too many situations I can think of where he did that. Cisco, he's got his son to think about. Janeway, I mean, they're in the Delta Quadrant. And if you're watching or listening, you can think of a situation, there's an episode that you can point to, say, no, actually, they really would. And maybe I'm way off, but
Mhm.
I'm curious in your thoughts really briefly on that.
Yeah, I think they would. In Janeway's particular case, I think Janeway is mentally and emotionally closer to it because, it was her decision got them to the Delta Quadrant. So I think if she felt she she would do anything to not only save her crew but get her crew back to the Delta Quadrant, including sacrificing herself. For
Well,
Janeway.
yeah, now that I think about it, well, at the end of towards the end of Year of Hell, doesn't she's the
Mhm.
last one on the ship and she rams the time ship, right? Which
Yeah.
now granted, she kind of sacrificed herself, but kind of doesn't because by doing that, it resets a timeline, so it doesn't actually happen, right? But that's a good point.
Yeah.
I know, our favorite captain both is Picard. Can you remember a time where he was in a situation where he almost had to? Maybe it's just one of those things where it's not really a situation. I mean, I don't count being Locutus because they beamed on board and stole him.
Mhm.
So it's not like he stepped up and said, "Hey, Borg, take me, assimilate me, leave my crew alone." I just,
I gotta go back and think about
yeah,
that. Yeah.
just some food for thought for
Yeah.
you and for the listeners. I just maybe it's just more that there was more situations that Kirk and Archer were put into where they kind of were close to that point of doing it or willing to step out and do that versus the other captains.
And there's a big stylistic difference because Kirk and Archer, um, Kirk was is has been and always is all about doing things himself, putting himself. Kirk's got to be in the action. He has to be in the action. That's like part of him. He's got to be in the action no matter what. Beam me down to the action. I got to go into this situation, right? He's not the type to kind of be back and observant and kind of observe the battlefield. He's got to be in the battle, and so he's getting himself into more of those circumstances.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably true. Maybe it's just a matter of the situations they were put in. 'Cause
Mhm.
they probably would, but just from what we see on screen,
Mhm.
and honestly, I love Cisco. You guys know I do. It's really close neck and neck with Picard and Cisco for me, but I feel like Cisco's got a son to think about.
Oh.
And would he really say, "Hey, I'm gonna die in order to save his crew," and then leave his son parentless? I don't know that he would. I don't know. Anyways, I don't want to
Oh,
necessarily mean to
that's
go down that rabbit trail, but you know what I mean?
yeah,
I just kind of was thinking about that as you're
yeah.
talking about Kirk and this idea of, being accountable for his own crew. And so because he's in command, it's his responsibility and just kind
Mhm.
of got me off on a thought there. But
Mhm.
something to think about, I guess.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
now here's where we get into this part of the episode where Kirk begins to get a little more brave with some of the things that he says, right? And some of the things that he starts asserting to the thralls.
Yeah. Yeah. Is this where
In particular his thrall.
oh yeah, his thrall, Shauna. This
Yeah.
is where Shauna's training him and is this where they're jogging? And
Yeah.
he's
I
asking
think so.
more
Yeah.
about like, yeah, who are the providers? Where are they coming from?
Yep.
And then she's getting really defensive, like, I don't think we're supposed to be talking about this. And he's asking about the ruins. They're jogging past some ruins. And what was this? Was this a city? Did they used to have bodies? Um, and did you always live here? And so apparently Shauna did always live there because her mother also fought in the game. So she must have been brought up as a gladiator per se in that case. But he asks a lot of questions and he goes too far. And then the providers activate the collar of obedience
Yep.
on Shauna and she's in pain. Yeah.
Yeah. And we know that prior to this, there was all that punishment and everything, and then the providers began their bidding on
Yeah.
the newcomers, right? They began saying, "Hey, I'll give X amount of thousands of quatlus or whatever their
Yeah.
monetary amount was." But all you hear are the voices, right? You don't see them, you don't know where they're coming from. They're just voices in the sky. And Kirk says, "Hey, look, we're free people. we don't belong to anybody. You don't own us. You can't own us. So this obviously goes back to the idea of slavery and owning people
Hmm.
and the idea of free thought and free choice and so forth. And it's interesting that I think the biggest bet wasn't the biggest bet on Kirk because they didn't think he was trainable. They couldn't train him into the way they wanted him to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Um, but they did recognize like how much how spirited Kirk was,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, I think that was a big part of it too.
Yeah, and it's interesting because after all the betting or whatever, bidding, I guess, on the
Hmm.
different on the 3 of them, their colors changed too.
Ah, that's right.
So that was interesting
Yeah.
because now that color comes in later, obviously. But,
Okay.
yeah, it's really interesting how Kirk begins talking to Shauna, that was her name, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Shauna. Yeah. Yeah.
About this idea of, who are the providers, where are they coming from? I come from this sparkly dot up there in the sky, and she's like, "How can you come from a sparkly dot?" or whatever. And it's very evident that she has no idea who she really is, where she came from, and that clearly she has been living a life of, you know, in a sense, slavery.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's that's the only life she's led. And so she has nothing to compare it to. And so she doesn't understand that it is slavery. Right? She
Yeah,
doesn't understand the idea um of freedom of thought, of freedom of action. It's just the only life she's had. And I like that they kind of, you know, they juxtapose those things, Kirk and 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 Shauna, because Kirk is asking these questions and she's uncomfortable. He keeps asking the why, who, why, where did they come from? What is all of this? Those kind of natural questions um as a human. And um she's she's never done that before. She's always taken her existence like for granted. So it's kind of neat to see her hear these questions from him and get those ideas. And she's scared at first, of course. Um, but in order to kind of evolve to the next level, then then she has to ask those questions herself.
yeah.
So neat.
And it's very, very evident from the very beginning of this episode that all the people, all the aliens and stuff on Triskelion
Hmm.
are there for the provider's amusement.
That's right. Yep.
It's really nothing more, honestly. It's not like they're doing anything. They're not building a settlement. They're not, farming the land, making food. It's strictly entertainment and amusement.
Hmm.
Which of course changes the way, like, okay, clearly these providers don't really care about them. They're
Hmm.
just there to appease them. Um, but interesting too because the whole kissing thing between Kirk and Shauna, they don't get punished for that. So obviously there's something there where maybe the providers are amused by that. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's
I
no
think,
punishment.
yeah, you're right. I think there's a comment from Galt. I think he appears and he says
Hmm.
something to the fact like the providers are amused
Yeah.
and
Oh yeah,
by
he
you
does.
guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of amused, back on the Enterprise, uh, Spock's like, "Hey, we're gonna go to this other system and
Mhm.
ask Scotty if he can get more than warp 6 out of the ship." And Dr. McCoy's like, "All right, you green-blooded, pointy-eared Vulcan or whatever, you're this hopeless errand you're on and everything." And uh, there's this big kind of blow up from
Yeah.
both Scotty and McCoy on the bridge in front of the rest of the crew that's there.
Yeah.
And so I remember when we were on the phone talking about this, and I'll let you go ahead and take this because I think you really liked the way Spock handled this situation from a leadership perspective.
Yeah, I do. So he had so Spock is acting captain at the moment, and then he has two of the most senior officers on the Enterprise questioning him, like in public, like saying, I think this is the wrong move and we should go back to Gamma 2. And that's what McCoy says, of course. And then Scotty chimes in like, yeah, I think we should too. And Spock quietly, he stands up and he quietly goes into both of them, and he leans in and he says, something to the effect of like, hey, we're going this direction. Um, unless of course, and he brings up, unless, these are my orders, unless of course you guys are planning a mutiny. Right? And then the reactions from, it's a very, very serious thing that Spock says.
Yeah.
You guys are, unless you're planning a mutiny. The reactions from McCoy and Scotty are kind of comical, like, oh no, no, of course we're not going to do a mutiny, like absolutely, like, absolutely not. And Spock is like, oh, okay. But Spock also says, if we don't find anything, and we're going to go back to Gamma 2 to look. And I think that was a great thing that Spock said there. Yeah, this was really, I'm really glad you mentioned this part about Spock, because this arc on Spock's leadership is really great, because um when I saw this scene, I'm I'm sorry, I'm going on a different rabbit trail.
It's
I
okay. I've
like it.
gone on a
Yeah.
couple myself already.
Yeah. So I love the Kipling, Rudyard Kipling
Yeah.
poem "If," right?
Yep.
And so the verse in that poem, and I'm going to connect this. The verse in that poem is, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. So so Spock is making, he made the decision to go to this planet based on kind of these anomalous energy readings. And so he's trusting himself. He's like, this is the only thing I've got. I'm trusting myself. I'm making the decision. We're gonna go look for the captain because it's the only like lead that I've got. Um, but he's still taking input, right? He's trusting himself, but he's still taking the input from McCoy and Scotty, going, okay, if we don't find anything, we're gonna go back. We're gonna try Gamma 2 again. So I love that, and I have no idea if they had that intent on this episode of Star Trek, but I just saw that and I'm like, what a cool um scene that they just had right there, and with the three of them and that dynamic of three. And so, yeah.
It was a good scene. I think it highlights the fact that I think as Star Trek fans, we grossly underestimate Spock's leadership skills.
Mhm.
I really do. I mean, some people might say, "Oh no, that's bogus." We all know Spock's a good leader. Well, I think we know he's a good leader, but I think there are many situations because, as you said, Kirk wants to be in the action, right?
Mhm.
So who's got to stay behind and manage the ship and lead the ship? Usually Spock, right? Sometimes Spock and Kirk go down together, but in general, a lot of times Spock stays behind. And it's very interesting how many times Kirk, knowingly or unknowingly, kind of puts Spock into a bad situation, having to figure things out and find him or help him or do whatever because he's got to be down there. And Spock's left to kind of pick the pieces up. And then you see his leadership shine through. Even for a Vulcan, he's not doesn't have emotion. Maybe you could consider him a little bit socially awkward because he doesn't have those emotions. Um, he's a pretty darn good leader.
Yeah.
And honestly, if something had ever happened to Kirk and he was, he kind of had a Captain Pike where he ended up in the chair, I think Spock could do a pretty good job stepping up and being captain of the Enterprise.
Yeah, absolutely he could. Um, love Spock.
Yeah,
Like, as
I
you
know
know,
you
he's
do.
like, he's
Yeah,
like my favorite, right up there with Captain Picard.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And for good reason too.
Yeah.
For good reason. Got a curse of the cat
I
butt.
do have the cat. On the audio, my cat just, well, you can't see it on the audio, of course, but
Yeah. But for those of you who can't see it, his cat just walked up and stuck his butt in the camera's face.
that's right.
Um, yeah. So Kirk gets dinner from his handler, Shanna,
Oh,
Shauna,
yeah. The nourishment interval.
the nourishment. Yeah, and even he's like, "Yeah, these are pretty good. I don't. This is pretty good." The nourishment interval, that's right, and, he gets some food from her, but, she talks about how she felt strangely because of his kiss and everything, and he gets kissing her again, and then he knocks her out, takes the key, gets out, frees himself, frees Chekhov and Uhura, helps disable their drill thralls, and, they find their phasers and try to short out their collars. Unfortunately, they get out to the arena and Galt shows up, and it's back to the shock collars again.
Yeah.
But they're not killed though.
Yeah, they're
The
not.
voice, one of the providers comes down and says, basically it's a warning and don't do that again and everything else. And then the Enterprise shows up around orbit of Triskelion, and this is where we get some of this interplay and some communication between Triskelion and the Enterprise and the providers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And Kirk, does Kirk go does he get beamed down underneath the planet at that point, or does that come a little bit later?
He does. Yeah, he does.
Okay. Oh, and can I back up a little
Yep.
bit to where yeah, he punches Shauna so and knocks her out so that they can escape? Because this is
Well,
all
did he punch her or did he like? I don't. I'm trying to remember off the top. But did he like Kirk karate chop him? The Kirk chop. I
yeah, he
can't
did
remember what it
something.
was, but
Yeah,
yeah, he
he
did
did
something. Yeah.
something that like
He
and
didn't
I
he didn't quite do the Sean Connery, James Bond haul off and whack her across the face or anything like that.
That's
But
right. That's right. So Kirk is uh like earlier, a few scenes earlier, when they're jogging and Kirk is building a lot of rapport with her, right? And then when he kissed her, Kirk is like, he's like a master chess player. So he's always thinking like 3, 4, 5 like moves ahead. So that was always in his mind, right? To kind of romance her to become close to him. So he could gain her trust and then and then he could incapacitate her so that they could escape.
yeah,
That's
and it's
classic
interesting
Kirk.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is a good point you make with the chess,
Yeah.
the steps ahead, right? Because so they get caught, right, and blah blah blah. Kirk then accuses the providers and basically plays a game of chicken with them, where he's like, "Yeah,
Hmm.
you're not really a danger. You're too afraid to show yourselves to us. Yeah, come on, show us. Come on, show yourselves, right?"
Yeah.
And then the providers are like, "Well, we don't think there's much of a risk." And then they transport him
That's right.
underground. I think they said something like 1,000 meters or something like that
Yeah.
from the
1,000
planet's
meters.
surface. So way down. That's a long ways, way down. And all of a sudden, he comes and he sees this little chamber, and behind him is a matte, for the purposes
Yeah.
of making the episode, is a matte painting from a different episode we've seen, but we've seen that
Oh
painting a
yeah,
couple
yeah,
of
yeah.
times in other
Yeah.
episodes. I want to say that painting is. I think we also see that painting in the episode "Devil in the Dark" with the Horta. I want to
Hmm.
say maybe the miners and they've run into this Horta and it's killing people and that's it's babies and everything. I want to say that's one of the episodes. But anyways, so you see this chamber, right? And then there's the three like red, yellow, and blue rubbery glowing
Yep.
glowing
3.
brains in the chamber. Yeah, 3
Yeah, 3.
in the chamber, right? Red, green, and yellow. Sorry, red, green, and yellow in this dome case, and all it is the brains.
That's right. And they get
And
a
it's
pet.
like, oh, that's all they are is brains, huh?
Yes, brains, big brains, and apparently they have evolved and they pursued their intellectual pursuits such that all they just evolved to not needing bodies and they would just do intellectual pursuits. And now the only thing that satisfies them are these games that they play, essentially, wagers on gladiators, like essentially to do, and that's all they do.
Yeah, and the providers are the gamesters of
Gamesters.
Triskelion,
That's right.
which make kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, the games that they're doing with these aliens that they're stealing and bringing to the planet to play these games until I guess they die, right?
Hmm.
That is their only purpose, which is
Yeah.
very that's what I don't understand. If you're so highly evolved, you don't need a body, but your only purpose now is to play games, that doesn't make any sense to me.
That was
Like,
depressing.
how are you
Yeah.
that highly evolved if that's your only purpose now? You evolved to that higher plane and now the only thing that satisfies you is playing games with people, like, that's you haven't, and maybe that's kind of the point, right?
Hmm.
You act like you're this highly evolved, highly intelligent thing, but really you're a child. You're just, you know, you're not as evolved as you think you are.
Yeah, that's right.
And maybe that's part of the message.
Yeah, and I think it was great, right? Because um they think they are so much more evolved than these other beings that they bring over, and that they're so much better that these than these other beings, and they're not. You know, they're not lower. And Kirk does a masterful job, I think, talking to them about it. It's like, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even to the point where he gambles and makes a bet with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the bet is that him and his crew would stay. And in fact, I think that they would also get the rest of the Enterprise crew.
Yeah, the
But
entire
if
crew.
he yeah, but if he wins and he fights an equal you know, I think he has to fight 3 of them, right?
Yeah,
And
three
if
of them.
yeah, and if he wins, they have to let him go. They have to let him and his landing party go. Well, that's a big wager.
This is a big
I
wager.
mean, you're talking about the whole crew of the Enterprise becoming these thralls. And so he knows, like you said, this is it's a very great point you made. He knows, and so because he's so many steps ahead, he knows that these providers, right? They couldn't resist a gamble like this.
Yeah.
Couldn't resist it. And of course, as we know from watching the episode, and as you probably know from watching the episode, if you're listening or watching this episode of ours, that Kirk is indeed successful in fighting off these 3, but he doesn't kill any of them, right?
I
Because
thought,
one of them is Shauna. One of them has to fight is Shauna.
yeah, one of them, she's like the fourth one that comes in, the initial three. I thought the big guy, he threw a spear at him and got him, but I don't know if that was a fatal one. And then
Oh, maybe he does. Yeah, maybe he
uh
takes him out. Interesting too that one of the aliens he fights
is an
is an
Andorian.
Andorian.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
And the Andorian's like throwing another spear, and like he ducks, and then it gets one of them.
Well, so he didn't kill him then, right? The Andorian did. He just ducked out of the way. Because I don't remember him actually killing anybody, but maybe the first one he did or something like that. But yeah, it's very evident when Shauna comes into the ring that Kirk doesn't want to fight with her.
Yeah.
But she goes on to start basically telling him, "Hey, you lied to me, you tricked me, and everything else." And but Kirk stands his ground, and that's when he's able to get a knife to her throat. She surrenders, and the providers, thankfully for the part of Kirk and his landing crew and the whole Enterprise, they keep their word and they release them. And a bit of a bittersweet moment there as Kirk kisses Shauna goodbye again, but you know, he tells her that she has a lot to learn before she should reach for the stars. And then, you know, Kirk, Uhura, and Chekhov go back to the Enterprise via the transporter this time. And Shauna starts to cry there at the very end as they
Yeah.
leave.
And I f- did you also feel a little bit bad for Shauna, because as Kirk is leaving, she says something to the effect like, "Oh, can I come with you?" And he says, "Well, no, you can't come with me." And so
Yeah.
she's I was like, "Oh, well, that was cold." She's got to
Well, yeah, because there's a quote too that she says at the end where it says, "Goodbye, Jim Kirk. I will learn and watch the lights in the sky and remember."
Yeah.
Very bit of a sad moment there. And then, of course, the Enterprise leaves Triskelion and off to the next planet of the week.
Yep. Yep.
But it's a very, I thought it was a pretty good episode, you know, for an episode that I remember being very hokey and cheesy and just not really very good. And yeah, it is to a certain extent, the very hokey and cheesiness, right? I thought there's a lot of good messages here, right? As we think of this idea of free will and free thought and the idea of being able to choose ourselves, not only our spouses or our mates or whatever, but also our life and the things that we do and the things that we say, to which the thralls on this planet did not have that luxury.
Right. Exactly. And questioning, like, what are you potentially like a slave to? Like, are you a slave to providers? Um, and or are you a slave to like a maybe a certain mode of thought, and not questioning. So I think that was a very, very good message. And the parallel message of with between Spock and Scotty and McCoy of trust, right? They through this kind of journey, they kind of learned to trust each other more. Spock was ultimately right. Like his hunch like was right. And so I think, through that process there's probably a much more developed sense of trust between them, making them a better team.
Yeah. And as a crew of a starship, or any crew for that matter, even here in real life, you learn a lot more about each other and about how you work together, and how well you can work together by going through strife, by going through trials. If everything was hunky dory and easy, you wouldn't, and not facing conflict, you wouldn't really know each other that well. You wouldn't see how well you can work together and how well you can overcome things, and the idea of resiliency.
Yeah.
But by going through those trials and everything else, right, you learn that, and I think that helps you grow, and you grow closer as a crew, which is why in the original series movies, right, from motion picture through Undiscovered Country, we see the tight knitness, if that's a word, of that crew of the Enterprise, because look at everything they went through in the original series before those movies were made.
Yeah, that's right. They're as tight as a family, like essentially, so
Yeah.
yeah, great point.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like anything else, right? You have to go through hardship and adversity if you're gonna grow and become stronger for it, and I think you made a good point there where that relationship grows. Now, of course, you're still gonna have McCoy and Spock and their thing, right? I mean, it's just
Yeah.
it wouldn't be funny if without it, right? And honestly, to some extent, McCoy and Spock's relationship is probably one of those relationships in which has never been repeated in any other Star Trek series, and just can't be. Because there are the original series fans, right, who are like, "Hey, Star Trek is only the original series. I don't want any of the rest of it." Because Star Trek is Kirk, Spock, McCoy, who are like the original series folks, not the other stuff. And that's
Yeah.
fine. You don't have to. I mean, if you that's all you like, that's cool. Hey, to each his own. And so a situation like this with the relationship of Kirk and Spock and McCoy, you kind of got to chalk one up in the win column for there with that one,
Yeah.
right? Because I don't know that kind of interplay and everything out that relationship could ever be duplicated again.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. They're such like on they're I don't want to they're not quite opposites. It's not like they're opposites, but they are so complementary. And despite the kind of banter that goes back and forth, uh I feel like there is this deep sense of like respect like between them, right?
Yeah,
You've got the banter, um and but behind it, there's a great deal of respect.
I think so. And honestly, like it's not even just Spock and McCoy. Obviously, Kirk and Spock's relationship. I don't know that there is a captain and first officer that are closer than the two of them. They're like brothers, basically, right? And we see
Yeah.
that in Star Trek 2 when Spock sacrifices himself and he says, "I have been and shall always be your friend." I know you. That's a moment that touches you very deeply, and how much that's a big deal for you. Um, and it is for me too, obviously. But yeah, so the people who say it's only Kirk, Spock, McCoy, the original series, I get it. I do.
Yeah.
I really do. No matter how much I love DS9 or TNG or anything else, I get it. I totally get why you feel that way. And the relationships that are built from this show and the movies make complete sense why you feel the way you do.
Yeah.
I don't 100% agree with it, obviously, but I totally understand why you feel that way. So
Yeah, totally.
this is a good episode. Some people are going to go, oh, that's a really weird kind of rando episode to be doing your spotlight series on when there's so many other better episodes of Star Trek. Well, we'll get to those one day. But this is just kind of one of those, hey, I watched it, we talked about it, and you're like, hey, why don't we do that for the spotlight? I'm like, sure, why not? That'd be fun.
Yeah, it was totally fun. And so this recent time that I watched it, I got a lot out of this episode, just like thinking about the Triskelion thing, and then all of the themes of three, the themes of leadership and of slavery. They packed a lot of stuff in there,
Yeah,
and whether intentional like or not, it, it was pretty cool.
it really is. And it makes me realize that there are so many times I watched the original series and I was just like, all right, how much longer is this episode? And then, of course, we started doing the podcast, and now my brain has become more analytical, and I really hone in on the dialogue of the episode. I don't care about the special effects. I don't care about the cheesiness of the foam rocks being thrown around or the different planet of the week with a different color sky that's on the same stage over and over again and all kind of looks mostly the same. I don't care about any of that.
Hmm.
It's the storytelling, right? It's the getting after what's the real message behind the episode, and that's across everything I watch now. Unfortunately, I kind of feel like I've been ruined because of analyzing for our show, analyzing this stuff to talk about, right? That I'm
Hmm.
like, yeah, now I really analyze dialogue so much more in everything I watch, which is really great too. And so something like this episode, I would have never given it a second thought. But then just randomly watching this episode on a work trip one night and going, "Wow, now that I've watched this again, there's some good stuff here to talk about."
And I don't know if I'm reading too much in the episode, but I had been thinking about this. So Kirk, so at the time of the episode, right, 1968, you said it was when that aired, and
Yeah.
Kirk selects Uhura to go down, and he selects Chekhov to go down.
Mm.
So, Uhura, African American, beautiful African American female, and then Chekhov, like a Russian officer on the United Star spaceship. And so, at the time in United States in 1968, so right, we're at this race. We're 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 racing to get to the moon.
Yep, got
Um,
the Russians and the Cold War and all that.
with Russia, and then the civil rights movement is around that time like strong, and so I'd been thinking about that and the kind of the idea of try and the idea of like, hey, what where's the intentionality and like why he selected Chekhov and Hura to go down like with them, and like, and what does that mean, so you've got these things happening in America at this time, right? Kirk, even though he's Canadian, but Kirk, right? So even
Well, Kirk wasn't Canadian; he was born in Iowa, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
Kirk
yeah, yeah.
Kirk
I
was
know you're
born in
talking. Yeah,
Iowa,
yeah,
but
yeah.
Kirk, born in Iowa, essentially the two parts of America with that are happening in that time frame in the 1960s, the civil rights movement, and then um, you know a Caucasian like a captain, and then Russia being there, and they're all going down, and they're all going through this experience like together, right? So they're having to get out of this circumstance that the providers put them in. Yeah.
Really good. I never thought about it like that. That's really good. And I mean, I could play it on the one hand, say, well, they're going to go down and check on a communications thing, so that makes sense that
Mhm.
Uhura goes down 'cause she's a
Yeah.
communications officer. And the other thing is it's also a astrogation station that's kind of Chekhov's role. So their roles kind of play. However, peel back the onion a little bit, right? And we see the next layer to that is exactly kind of what you said. Yeah, you've got that period of time, right? Civil rights movement and the freedom and the rights of African Americans, and then also obviously with the space race and the Russians and the Soviet Union and all this stuff. Uh, that might have been intentional. Maybe you're the first person to ever bring that up. I don't know.
I
That's
don't know.
pretty interesting.
When was the Cuban Missile Crisis? I'm trying to remember that the date was in my
That would
mind.
have been during JFK's presidency, so that would have been like early '60s.
Okay, okay.
This would have
So
been post that, I think.
yeah,
But regardless, still, this idea of this like kind of uh shot for shot with the Russians, right, in the Cold War and everything. It makes sense. So it's really good, really awesome. You pointed that out. I never would have thought of that, but um, yeah, I think so. If you're watching or listening to this episode, I think the thing to be learned here, in addition to the messaging of the episode, is that go back and watch the original series and blow past all the stuff that maybe is a roadblock for you, whether it's the hokey cheesiness of the 1960s television shows or the special effects or the fact that they did things back in the 60s that you don't think is appropriate anymore because it's now 2024 and everything. Get past all of that and go back and watch the dialogue. I'm going to challenge myself to go back and watch more obscure, I'll say call it obscure, but like more maybe off the beaten path or the not popular episodes of Toss and really listen to the dialogue
mhm.
because I think we may have more situations like this with the Gamesters of Triskelion where it's like, that episode's actually pretty good. Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you happened to watch this episode on your work trip and then mention it because I loved this.
It was good, yeah, it
Yeah.
was really good. I actually enjoyed this far more than I thought I would, and we loved bringing it to all of you who are watching and listening to us all over the globe in the interwebs. We definitely appreciate that, we hope that you have enjoyed another deep dive as part of our Spotlight series. We've gone kinda back and forth from the Mirror universe and the Prime universe, and it's been awesome. I'm really, really liking this Spotlight series we're doing, Chris. I know we don't have a particular new show where we're doing a episode by episode review of. We're gonna have to wait a little bit longer for that, unfortunately. But we will eventually get back to doing those when shows come out that we decide we want to do episode by episode reviews of. But in the meantime, when we do these kind of one offs, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, really breaking them down and talking about all the intricacies and the themes and the messaging in them.
Yeah, it is tremendous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyways, thank you all very much so much for watching and listening. We do very much appreciate it. Be sure to go on to Facebook and Instagram, check us out there. Follow us for more. If you're on YouTube, be sure to hit the subscribe button to get the notifications for the latest episodes on your YouTube feed when those come out. And if you haven't had a chance to watch yet, go back and watch our episode of the Terminator franchise and our discussion of AI. As you mentioned, Chris, at the beginning, the AI might be coming for us. That was a really fun discussion. An amazing sci fi franchise that we both love very, very deeply, and have seen many, 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 many times. And also some really good discussion on where AI currently is at and whether or not it scares the bejesus out of us. Because here's a hint, it might a little bit
Yeah, it
without spoiling
does.
too much. But go back and watch that or listen to it because it's really good and a lot of good discussion there about the franchise and also about artificial intelligence with some really good articles too that we found.
Yep.
That's great. So, anyways, thank you all so much. We do very much appreciate it. And we'll catch you next time right here on the Random Redshirt podcast.